On the first day of my investigation into trying to catch Robert Hanssen, the most damaging spy in FBI history and might quite possibly US history, he looked at me and he said, "Have you ever heard of Hansen's Law?" Now, to set the stage here, I was tasked to go undercover to work in the information assurance section, a brand new section that had been designed by the FBI just to catch this individual, one of the highest level FBI agents in counterintelligence, someone who worked against Russian spies for his entire career. They created this new division just to trap him, and looked around and found the only other person in the FBI, apparently, who knew how to catch a spy and turn on a computer. And that was me. And asked me to go undercover in this new division that was supposed to protect how we share and protect data throughout the FBI and when we were coordinated with other agencies. So to say that I was a little off balance going into this investigation would be a big understatement. And on that first day, I sat across from Robert Hanssen, trying to figure out a way to talk to him, to get him to tell me his secrets without him knowing that's what I was doing. And he looks at me and he says, "I want to tell you about Hansen's Law." I said, "Well, that sounds interesting. What's that?" And he says, "The spy is always in the worst possible place." Let that hit for a minute. I mean, I'm trying to investigate him. He's not supposed to know that's what's happening. And when he says that, I think to myself, does he know? But I kept a cool, calm, and collected face. I looked right back at him and I said, "What do you mean by that, boss?" I was always supposed to call him boss or sir. And he says, "Hansen's Law is simply this. The spy is in the worst possible place. He is that person who has access to the information that will do the most damage and the knowledge and the wherewithal to get that information to those who will pay him the most for it. And that, Eric, is what we're in the FBI to catch." Now, it's a very elegant law. The spy is in the worst possible place. And during my entire time in the FBI and afterwards, as I moved into cybersecurity and still catch cyber spies, that elegant law has served me well, and it should serve you well too, because no matter whether you are a large business or small or medium, particularly if you're small, that spy is always in the worst possible place when they're coming to steal that data that has become the currency of our lives. And this has become so prevalent in our incredibly connected world. Remember, in the old days, when I began in the FBI, we were still using paper. I'm aging myself a little bit here, but it's perfectly true. And then we slowly digitized all that information, took that paper that used to be in file cabinets, placed it in computer systems, networked the computer systems, and have leveraged the internet and now the cloud in ways that we have never seen before in history. We can connect at the speed of thought. We can connect right now with me in my home and you wherever you are. And the pandemic accelerated this connection, this use of technology, this leveraging of the cloud before anyone was ready. Let's back up just a little bit of history, right? Recent history. Remember that the World Health Organization, the WHO, declared the outbreak, a pandemic, in March of 2020. Now, remember that whole thing where we all went home and it was only supposed to be 2 weeks to stop the spread? Since the outbreak of COVID-19, 81% of the global workforce had their workplaces fully or partially closed. And the pandemic is primarily over at this point, but it ravaged the world. Over 1 million people dead in here in the US, and world deaths have exceeded almost 7 million people. So every great crisis, obviously, has very lasting consequences. And even though we've learned a lot over the last 2 years, particularly about security and about embracing the cloud to continue the work we want to do, collaborate and share, we've also created a sandbox for attackers and spies. And if you think about Hansen's Law, if you think about the spy always in the worst possible place, well, spies have had to evolve. They can't send some mole into a building anymore. They don't even need to cross foreign lines. They don't have to come to the US and work a source and get them to go in and steal paper and bring it out and put it in a dead drop, and all those old systems in the dark shadows and alleys that spies used to use. Traditional espionage has transformed. It has evolved. There are no hackers Let me throw that theme out for you there. There are no hackers, there are only spies. Hacking is nothing more than the necessary evolution of espionage. As we put all that information in data, the spies had to evolve to steal it where that information is. And that is why you see such an incredible prevalence of cyber attacks, particularly over the last 2 years of the pandemic. See, we accelerated the adoption and implementation of many technologies that would have probably taken years, if not decades, to become mainstream. Every person who went home was using the cloud, whether a business was ready for it or not. Your transactions with customers changed. The way that you receive funds and the way that you pay vendors changed. And spies knew it. And criminals have learned from the spies. So with this acceleration of technology in our lives, it hasn't even changed that much, even though the pandemic is, for all intents and purposes, over. 82% of employers here in the US are still allowing employees to work partially remote, and 47% allow full telework. The future of work is a tele-everything world. And the criminals, like I said, have learned from the spies, and they've used the dark web to build new criminal syndicates. And the most important point is that those criminals don't care what you have, what you sell, what your intellectual property is, who you are, how important you are. They only care whether you are vulnerable. So for small and medium businesses, and small in particular, criminals who have learned from the spies, they've learned the best in breed espionage, cyber attacks are coming after you. And if you don't get ready for them, if you don't have good cybersecurity, then they're going to succeed. And they have been. And they're using the dark web to get paid. And they're using the dark web as an e-learning source. And they're using the dark web to grow. So what is the dark web? I've been amazed, and I've been speaking throughout this entire year and talking a lot about the dark web, and audiences just, for the most part, don't really know what it is because it's never really explained. So here's your explanation. What is the dark web? Well, think of it this way. Think of the dark web as a system of caverns under the earth because, they're dark and you have to crawl through them, and they're warrens and narrow crawls and systems and corridors and caves, all of these places deep under the earth. That cave entrance at the top, well, that's the surface web. That's simply where you can walk in, look around, see some stalactites, see some stalagmites, have a good time, take some Boy Scout troop in. That's where you can Google something, search something with Yahoo, DuckDuckGo, Safari, whatever is your favorite browser, all the things that are open that we want people to find. That's the surface web. Public information. Marketing loves this. Information that you want out there, social media information that you need to have out there for some reason or other is all there. Now, under the earth, where you got to crawl down a bit, about 90% of the internet, well, that's the deep web. That goes all the way down. That is the things that are protected by passwords. And if you're really smart, multi-factor authentication, because by the way, passwords absolutely don't work. They're all for sale on the dark web. One of the problems is people tend to use the same password for everything. And all you have to do is lose it in one breach. It all ends up for sale. Usernames and passwords and lots of 1,000 that get bought and sold by criminals. And they just try them against businesses and bank accounts and medical records and anything they can steal and sell. So the best deep web information has multiple factors of information protection on it. Like, for example, that text you get on your phone. If you don't have that turned on for everything, pro tip, turn it on now. So you have that second code after the password, because that can be the difference between a breach that causes catastrophic damage to your reputation and bank account and protecting yourself against that attacker. Now, that last 5% of the internet, the very bottom, the deepest and darkest part, the end of the cavern, 7 miles down, that is the dark web. And the dark web is growing at an exponential rate. If that's 5% of the internet, as the internet grows, the dark web grows. Right now, the internet is 80 zettabytes of information. We can't even conceive as humans of a zettabyte. But let me put it this way. If you took paper, regular old paper, and you stacked it page upon page upon page upon page, all the way up as high as you could go, and you stacked it for an entire light year, which would get you to the Andromeda galaxy, that's a zettabyte. That's how much information is there. It boggles the mind. And we're growing with every single moment. Did you know that every second of every day, we make 6 million e-commerce transactions? All of that information expands the internet. We tweet, we post pictures. We're constantly growing the information that is there, networked, available to us when we need it, but also available to criminals when they want to steal it. By 2025, the internet will be 180 zettabytes. You could go back and forth to the Andromeda galaxy, that's a light year away, 180 times. That's more than twice the size. And the dark web is growing. According to the World Economic Forum, the dark web is already the third largest economy on earth by GDP. That means we still go the US, and then we go China, I know, and they're creeping up on us, but we're holding strong here in the US. And then normally it's Germany or Japan, they kind of flip-flop. Right now, it's the dark web, a place that has no brick and mortar stores, a place that has no offices. There's no physical area for it. It lives on virtual computers all over the world called volunteers, which is why law enforcement can't shut it down. And it's where criminal syndicates thrive, cyber spies thrive, cyber criminals thrive, and learn from each other. You can buy anything there, from new malicious malware to a cyber attacker for hire who might launch a distributed denial of service attack, which would flood your network and shut it down so that you can't make a sale or receive a check. You can even, but this happened a lot during the pandemic, maybe some enterprising students, I call it the modern version of pulling the fire alarm. You could hire a cyber attacker on the dark web to attack the school and shut down their network, get you out of a test. I mean, there's so much you can do there and so many illegal things that happen, and it's growing. According to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, a pretty cool place. Like if I was still in the FBI, I kind of want to be in the Internet Crime Complaint Center. I think that they're really on the cutting edge of figuring out computer crime. According to the IC3, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, cyber attack reports have quadrupled in the last 2 years. That's 4 times as many as we were suffering from the lockdowns. In 2020, there were 800,000 internet crime complaints. That's just the people who were reporting to the FBI, by the way. That's up 69% from the year before, 2019. And the cost, $4.2 billion in losses. I mean, that's an enormous amount of money that was just handed to cyber crime that could have been used for so many other good things while we were all suffering from an immense catastrophe in the world. But it gets worse. In 2021, it went up to 850,000. That's only 50,000 more, but man, we were already sort of at the height of cyber attacks. There's only so many cyber attacks that can happen, except for it cost more. 6.9 billion in losses. More cyber attacks, and they raised the price. Now, like I said, attackers, they're coming after you because they don't care who you are, just if you're vulnerable. Because criminals are lazy. If they weren't lazy, they wouldn't be criminals. They'd go get a regular job. They'd be entrepreneurs. They'd be investors. Well, they kind of are all that because you can do all that on the dark web now as part of a criminal syndicate. But they don't want to work really hard. So they're looking for what we called in the intelligence world soft targets. And unfortunately, small businesses tend to be there. And one of the 2 worst things that you have to look out for in cyber attacks right now are ransomware, which you probably heard a lot about, and business email compromise. I'm going to get into both, and I promise you, bear with me, I'm going to end by telling you how we caught Robert Hanssen, the biggest spy in US history, and also our first cyber spy. So ransomware right now is on a rampage. Custom malware that, like I said, is bought and sold on the dark web. It's developed there. There are forums where criminals will talk about how to build, how to distribute, how to launch attacks. Has led to an unprecedented number of ransomware attacks. I mean, there's been a scourge of ransomware in the last 2 years. In 2021, last year that we have all the data, the IC3, remember that Internet Crime Complaint Center, received almost 4,000 complaints that were ransomware for losses of more than 49.2 million. And most of those attacks, by the way, didn't just lock your systems. Remember, now, for those who, the one or two people who haven't been attacked by ransomware yet, who are not sure how it works, malicious software gets onto your systems, usually spreads through your network, and typically through spear phishing, where you get that email that you shouldn't click on the link and you shouldn't click on the attachment, but they really look good. And then all your information is encrypted and locked. You can't get it. Now, what the attackers also are doing is stealing all your information. That way, if you say, hey, I got a great backup, I don't need to pay you, they say, sure. But then we're going to sell all your information to your competitor. We're going to post all your information online for everyone to see. We've got your CEO's email box, and we found some really disturbing emails, and we're going to send those to the press. Or we're going to give your financials to your biggest client, right? All sorts of things that will get you to pay because they want to put you in a pressure situation. And one of my biggest tenets of security is don't wait for the pressure situation to examine your security. Examine your security when you can relax. You know, in 2021, recovering from ransomware cost almost $2 million. And if you don't have $2 million to spend, you don't want to be locked by ransomware because that's just recovering. That's after you paid the ransom. Now, the biggest ransomware attack, which is a great one to highlight, happened in early 2021 with Colonial Pipeline. I like to highlight this because I live on the East Coast, and Colonial Pipeline is a major company that would send gasoline, petrol, not only to airports, but to gas stations from the West Coast all the way to the East. And it was where I lived here near Washington, D.C., where you probably heard the news stories after Colonial Pipeline was locked by ransomware. That led to people not being able to get gas at their gas stations and doing silly things like putting gas in a trash bag. Let that drop for a minute. People were taking garbage bags, putting them at the pumps and filling up the garbage bag. Then what do? I mean, you can't tie it off. You hold it in your passenger seat as you're driving along. I mean, it's an engineering disaster. And then how do you even get it in your lawnmower or your car later? But when there is a crisis, people don't always react the sanest way. I mean, we saw that the last 2 years of the pandemic. And Colonial Pipeline was completely locked by ransomware. In fact, at 5 a.m. on a Friday, because attackers love to hit you just before the weekend and ruin everybody's weekend, they think it creates some pressure to pay. A control room employee sees a note demanding money, cryptocurrency, on his computer. And by 6:10 a.m., the company shut down all their operations. Like I said, gas stations on the East Coast ran out of gas. Chaos ensued. How did they do it? Well, the attackers compromised a password that was used for an account, a virtual networking account, which means someone who could work remotely, which means someone who was working from home during the pandemic. And they bought the username and password off the dark web. Now, the problem here is the username and password was bought off the dark web, which means that that person used the same password that he used in other things, and it was stolen in a different breach and for sale in the dark web. And this crime syndicate finds it, and they're shocked. Wow, we can attack critical infrastructure. They're definitely going to pay. The old account, by the way, did not have multi-factor authentication. Big problem. So on May 8th, locked down, with no recourse and massive political pressure being placed on the company, Colonial Pipeline had to pay. And they paid a reported $4.4 million. That's nowhere near the biggest ransom request. The biggest is still $70 million for a key to unlock a company who was attacked and all their customers were attacked. But 4.4 million, that's a lot of cheddar. Now, the FBI was able to recover a portion of it, but still, you don't want to be paying a bunch of criminals just to have the data that belongs to you back. Colonial Pipeline is a massive company. But the truth is that small and medium businesses are harder hit by ransomware. It's more costly, and criminals see you as vulnerable targets, so they're coming after you at an unprecedented rate. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is business email compromise. It's not as sexy as ransomware, but actually it does more damage, and you are more of a target for business email compromise as a small business than you might think. And the fact is that this is where every employee, every one of your employees, including yourself, plays a critical role in cybersecurity, in protecting information. Business email compromise is simply this. And sometimes it's called the CEO or the CFO hack. What happens is the criminal can email, they can call, or they can, what we've seen now is virtual conference with an employee posing, impersonating someone in authority. So you'll see a case where, for example, the CEO comes over a chat within your virtual conferencing app. Maybe you use Teams, Zoom, whatever, and tells an employee to immediately pay a PO or immediately send a wire. Now, you normally see this through email, of course, which is why it's business email compromise. That's sort of the modern version, is using these networking tools we use. The email will come from the CEO. Either it's a spoofed email account or the attackers have already compromised the boss's email account, maybe your email account. And they're sending it to your employees. Usually they try to get the controller or someone in finance. They say, pay this PO, pay this vendor, send this wire. This costs enormous amounts of money. In 2019, it cost organizations $26 billion. By May of 2022, it reached $43 billion. And in 2021, 77% of all businesses were targeted by business email compromise criminals. So like I said, those cyber criminals, they don't care how big you are or what data you have to steal. They only care whether you're vulnerable. And I hear it all the time. It can't happen to me. I'm not big enough. I have nothing for them to take. My network is secure. Well, it's probably not. There's probably some work you have to do. And like I said, right now, if you're calm, cool, and collected, if you're not suffering from a cyber attack, if you're taking the time to listen to me here, now is the time to examine your security, not when you're in a pressure situation. One more story, and then I'm going to tell you how we caught Hansen. This was a really interesting attack, and it's one that I've seen a bunch, but it's really clever. We're looking at a company, and they were breached. They were trying to figure out how they were breached, and went through email. And we found that these attackers were very innovative. We've all been doing these virtual conferences. For the last 2 years, we've been doing tons of them. I know, because I've spoken at so many virtual conferences, and thank you for having me here. And what the attackers did is they went on LinkedIn. No problem there. I mean, LinkedIn is a great resource. And they looked for virtual conferences, and then they went and looked for where the virtual conference organizer sent information to everyone who attended saying, thank you for attending. And, here's some recaps. Here's the big PowerPoint. Here's a video of Eric O'Neill speaking, those kind of things. And they put it out all over social media, but, these attackers used LinkedIn. And they found everyone who liked that post on LinkedIn, the attendees. And then they went through all the attendees who liked it, who said that they were there, and they found the ones that were in IT for a company, small company. And then they crafted an email. And the email looked like it came from the conference organizer, and it was really clever. You know how we've all been to conferences, and you wander around the booths, the vendor booths after, and you find like the cool tchotchkes, like the squeezy doll and the little stuffed animal for your kids, and then you get a new pen, and one of those things you put your badge on that clips on your belt and retracts, and all that stuff, right? And they sent an email that said, thank you for attending our conference. We really appreciate that you were here. And you couldn't be here physically, and we hope next year to host the conference physically, but we want to give you a gift anyway. Because if you came to our conference physically, you would have been able to get, your backpack or your shoulder bag or that. So pick one of three. Click here, pick one of three. A glowing Minecraft sword, a Yeti mug, and a really nice laptop backpack. So which would you pick? Well, everyone, it turns out, picked. Pretty much no one reported it as phishing because it looked right. It was everything you need to launch a really good phishing attack, spear phishing. They remembered going to the conference. They recognized the name of the organizer, the conference. And they really wanted that Minecraft sword. It turned out like most people pick the Minecraft sword because we all have kids and we know that that's going to be a great present to bring home. They went on to they clicked through, they picked the item they wanted, they entered their name and their email and their address they wanted it sent to, all that information, which was scooped up by the attackers, and they were breached. And so you have to be extremely careful. So with that, I'm going to tell you how we caught Robert Hanssen. So how do you catch a spy? How do you catch the biggest spy in US history? How do you stop the spies and criminals from stealing the information from your organization? I mean, it's not easy. And for me, I was working undercover, trying to catch this spy, trying to get him to talk to me, trying to get him to give me information in a tool that we call elicitation. So I'm talking to the spy, we're having a conversation. He doesn't know that I'm trying to get information out of him. And it's an art. Now, the problem was I was never trained to do this. I was an undercover operative that worked for a team of undercover operatives in the FBI conducting counterintelligence, catching spies, and counterterrorism, catching terrorists, called the Ghosts. I was never supposed to be seen. And now I'm working face to face with him in an office, trying to catch the biggest cyber spy in the information assurance section, the section that was supposed to create cybersecurity for the FBI. That was a pretty hard task. But the good news is criminals have routines. And Hanssen had a pretty significant one. He had a Palm Pilot. Who remembers those? That's right. It was a digital PDA for anyone who is on the younger side in the audience. Personal data assistant. Basically, it was a big, fat calendar about that thick, and you'd open it up and you'd tap, tap, tap with a stylus to get information into it. And it wasn't a touch screen. You use basically a plastic stick, and you could hook it up to Outlook and sync it and get all your calendar information onto the device that you then put in your pocket and wander around. I mean, anyone who grew up with smartphones thinks this is completely ridiculous because now everything we do is on our phones. Our entire life is on your phone. Take the phone away from one of your teenagers and you'll see how dedicated everyone really is to their phone. There's no greater fit than a teenager who has just lost their phone. And Hanssen loved this Palm Pilot. He kept it in his left back pocket. And every time he sat down, he'd pull it out of his pocket and put it in his bag. I mean, the thing was so thick, you couldn't sit down without hurting yourself if it was in your back pocket. And like clockwork, when he stood up, he'd reach into his bag, grab it, and put it right back in his back pocket. Over and over and over again. I said, we got to get that away from him. The problem is, of course, I'm not a magician. I don't pick pockets. And if I did steal it from him when he was walking around somehow, the second he sits down, it's game over. So I asked him about it. I said, boss, what's that thing about that Palm Pilot you've always got on you? And he pulled it out and he said, this device organizes your life. You're nothing but a no good, no nothing, worthless clerk. So you wouldn't understand about organizing your life. But if you ever did, then maybe you could make it to executive service like I did, right? He is kind of boastful guy. Thing about trusted insiders, by the way, they tend to be narcissists. And Hanssen certainly was one. He was also not the nicest guy in the world. So I said, we have to get this away from him. Now, a couple problems here. He's sitting down. When he sits down, it's in his bag. So we had to hack Hanssen. We had to social engineer him. And here's what I did. We had an assistant director come in unannounced, slap $20 on his desk and say, you and me, the rifle range right now, firing range right now, I'll bet you that 5 targets out of 5, I can beat you. And Hanssen was disrupted at this point. See, I had chosen this assistant director because quite possibly to see if he could trust me, Hanssen gave me this really strange task. He told me one night he wanted me to go steal the art, take the pictures out of one of the assistant director's conference rooms. This guy, the assistant director that we read into the case just to come pull Hanssen out and get him away from his Palm Pilot. And so I did. One night, I was going to law school while I was working at the FBI. So at night, I would go to GW, and then I'd usually come back to the office, and we'd have a search of the office, or I'd talk to the agents and figure out what they wanted me to do the next day. And one night, instead of doing that, I took a computer cart, and like a thief in the night, I snuck through the office until I got to the assistant director's conference room on the 7th floor. And I stole all the art off his walls, 3 big paintings. You know, they were prints. It wasn't like they were super expensive, but the guy obviously liked them. They were hung perfectly. And I went down to our room at 9930 or up, I guess, 2 flights, and got into that big skiff and hung one over his desk, one over my desk, and one over in a desk that no one was ever going to sit at. And so when he came in the next day, he saw the one I hung over his desk, and he was really happy. And when that assistant director came into his office to challenge him to shoot, the first thing he looked at was his art over Hanson's desk. Now, Hanson's embarrassed, but he can't really say anything. This is his boss. And I'm trying not to laugh because I finally got back at him for making me do that. And the assistant director at that point knew that Hanson was suspected of espionage, so he wasn't going to say anything about it. So everything was really awkward, which was perfect. Because for the first time, he stands up and he forgets to grab that Palm Pilot. He grabs his firearm. He grabs his ear protection. He grabs his eye protection. And he leaves. He goes down all the way to the sub-basement. And he starts to shoot. Now, I had planned, right? Remember that thing about pressure situations? Don't figure out things when you're in the pressure situation. This time I'd planned ahead. And I knew that someone was down there waiting. And as soon as Hanson got down there, he texted me and said, "In pocket shooting." I went to the bag, opened 4 pockets that were all completely equal, and I pulled out his Palm Pilot. Palm Pilots have data. We wanted to see what was on it. There was also a floppy disk and a data card. All that has data. We took it all. I ran down 2 flights of steps, 3 flights, I'm sorry, to the 6th floor, where we had a tech team just sort of hanging out, waiting for me to get this right. And finally, I did. I handed off the data. They hooked it up to their computer systems. They looked at it and they said, the Palm Pilot's encrypted, the data card's encrypted. We're going to copy it all and just break the encryption later. I'm like, you can do that? We're the FBI. I'm like, all right, good, get going. And I'm waiting. And as I'm waiting, it was only a couple minutes, I get another text. I looked at it and it said, "Out of pocket, coming to you." So I knocked on the door. You can tell I don't really stand still very much. And the tech team had thrown me out because it was making them nervous. And I poked my head in and I said, yeah, I'm going to need those devices. And they said, yeah, we're almost done. Don't worry. I said, you don't understand. He's armed. I'm not. He's angry. And if I don't get this up there before him, not only are we going to blow this entire investigation, he'll probably shoot me. So I'm waiting. And they hand the devices to me and say, go. I run up 3 flights of stairs. I get to my main office. I slam the big door. That's what saved me. I go into his office. I slam his door. I kneel down in front of his bag. I'm feeling really good. This isn't like Jack Bauer. It's not like James Bond. It's not like the last second you cut the wire and the bomb doesn't go off. I had like a cool few minutes, but I couldn't figure out what pocket I'd pulled the devices out of. 3 devices, 4 pockets, no clue. And as I'm trying to think back and figure out, where did I pull this from? How did I do this? I hear him coming through the door. So I just dropped all 3, zipped up all 4 pockets, put the best poker face I've ever had right here, ran to my desk, sat there, and just tried to look normal. And he comes through my office, glares at me, goes into his office, slams the door, and what do I hear? Zip. I'm thinking at that point, I should probably run. But here's another tenet of intelligence work. We straddle this line between suspicion and paranoia, right? All right, like a whole chapter in my book, Gray Day, about this, about what it's like to work in this world. You're always suspicious. In fact, suspicion's good. You're watching your 6. You're covering the angles. You know who's behind you. You know whether someone's taken 3 turns with you. And whatever operational act you're going to do, whether it's loading a drop site or trying to steal information or whatever side you're on, you don't do it that day. But if you're paranoid, that means you can't function. You're worried about everything. You have no self-confidence. And when you're paranoid, that person who's followed you, who's taken 3 turns with you, that grandma that's behind you, they're a spy. They're after you. You can't function at all. And I knew that Hansen, at this point, had fallen into paranoia. He'd gone down and shot. I saw the video of him in the range. He goes down, he sends his target down line, he pulls his firearm, he shoots a clip, he pulls the target back, looks at it, and then doesn't do anything. He turns and walks away. And he comes up because he realized he didn't have his Palm Pilot. And then he realized, do I really trust Eric? And he comes out of his office, and I stood there, but I sat there at my desk because I knew if I was gone, then that push from suspicion to paranoia would have been so quick. He would have taken the open passport we'd already found with a fake passport for him to leave, with an open ticket he had to Moscow. And at this point, he'd probably be roommates with Edward Snowden or something. And so I had to be there. And comes out and he leans over his desk and he looks right at me and he says, "Were you in my office?" And he holds that glare at me. I said, "Yeah, I was in your office. I put a memo in your inbox. Didn't you see it?" And I had, right? Always be prepared. And he looks at me, and then he looks at me. He says, "I never want you in my office again." And he leaves for the day. Now, less than a week later, he's on a bridge in Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia. It's only a stone's throw from his house. And he looks around him and sees whether he's alone. Now, it's around 7 p.m. on a Sunday, so he's pretty alone. And he reaches into his sport coat and he pulls out a package about that big. It's wrapped in trash bags and packing tape, so it's completely protected from the elements. Steps off the bridge and he slides that package into the superstructure where it won't be seen by kids at play or joggers or dog walkers. Then he climbs back on the bridge, he knocks the dirt off his shoes, and he smiles to himself. Now, it's a cold February day. It's 2001. It's before September 11th. And he's happy because he's just loaded his final drop to the Russians after 22 years of being their top spy in the intelligence community, in the entire US intelligence community. And he's going to retire with a 25-year pension, get his gold watch, and take a new job at a cybersecurity company. He retraces his steps out of the park, goes to his car that he's parked in the neighborhood, reaches into his pocket for his keys, and 2 vans screech to a halt. Panels, side doors open, FBI agents jump out, their guns raised. He puts his hands up. He's under arrest, and he says, "The guns are not necessary." And then he says, "What took you so long?" He's arrested for espionage and will spend the rest of his days in Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. And we knew not only where he would be when he made that final drop to the Russians, but exactly when, because a Palm Pilot is a digital calendar. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you catch a spy. So I want to leave you with one last thought before you continue this excellent conference and learn how to protect all of your small businesses and businesses as you grow from the scourge of cyber attacks. It's an update to Hansen's Law. Now, in a nod to my old boss, I like to call it O'Neill's Law. And it's simply this: hacking is the necessary evolution of espionage. There are no hackers. There are only spies. We have to hunt that threat before the threat hunts us, because the spy is always in the worst possible place. Thank you so much for having me as your speaker today. And I hope that you can go out, hunt that spy in the worst possible place, and help make the world a little safer from cyber attacks. Thank you.